Do you see?
Yeah, maybe it's a little red. Maybe can you change the color a bit?
I'll choose the color. Yeah.
Yeah, that's better. Okay.
That's better.
Yeah.
Let me just try it a little bit.
Okay. Well, it looks like we're on. Got a few people already waiting. It's another 4 minutes or so. Somebody's saying good morning. They must be far away.
Do you know the time in Nepal, Ajahn?
No. Oh, he's from the Philippines.
From?
Philippines.
Philippines.
Yeah. Okay. Yankee Apples just checked in. Okay, Germany, Portugal, Wales. We've got a real international crew comes on these. Vietnam, Australia.
You almost have all the continents.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. So this is third installment on the series of the Pãramīs. We've done Dana and Sila. Today we're going to do Nekama. Nekama is renunciation. And that may be a scary word for some people. I think most people, when they first encounter the idea or the concept of renunciation, they think it's a very hard and dismal kind of concept. But it's actually not. It's represents freedom. It's liberation. It's nakama means a freedom from the tyranny of desire, the ability to walk away from uh, the bindings that we have to samsaric existence. People who are addicted to their sense pleasures find it or think it would be impossible to relinquish them. They can't imagine living without them. But just remember when you were a small child, I'm sure you had a favorite toy, whether it was a truck or a dolly or stuffed bear. It was something you couldn't imagine living without. And now you don't have it anymore. You don't miss it. You don't have any desire for it or a replacement for it. But at the time, you couldn't have imagined living without it. The Buddha once told a teaching story, and it's rather a strong one on this point about transcending sense pleasure, relinquishing desire. And he said to the monks, have you noticed in the marketplace, there's this leper that sits in the marketplace, and his skin is covered with weeping sores. And people throw him a few coins out of pity. And he sits there on the ground, and beside him, he has a little metal brazier full of red hot coals. And every now and again, with a pair of tongs, he'll take one of these red hot coals and press it into one of his sores, and the flesh will boil and sizzle. But it momentarily relieves the suffering of that sore. The Buddha said, do you imagine if that leper were miraculously healed and made whole and clean and could stand up and walk away? Do you think he'd ever miss his brazier and his hot coals? You think he'd ever be nostalgic for the relief of burning the rotten flesh? No, of course he wouldn't. And then he explained that the parable is that the weeping sores are like the sense organs, and the hot coals are like desirable sense objects. That just for a moment, there's a sense of satisfaction and relief when the pleasant object impinges on the sense organ. It's hard for us as humans. We're part of the sense desire realm of existence, and it's hard for us to imagine a type of consciousness that's not dependent or subdued by the senses. But there is that experience available to us in jhana, and there are whole realms of existence of the Brahma gods that are beyond sensuality. And there's a transcendence. It's getting beyond, it's evolving beyond the need for the coals and the sores. So the Nikama Parami is renunciation, is the giving up. It's the spiritual strength of being able to say no, to give up on some something on which you are dependent, on something on which you are bound. And every act of renunciation in this way strengthens the Nikama Parami. And the mind becomes a little lighter, a little more free, a little less bound and burdened. The dependence on sense objects is, for most humans, it's the most obvious and troublesome of the desires. But there are other desires as well that also uh, need to be renounced for full liberation. One very pernicious one, I think, is attachment to views. We get very attached to our ideas and our theories and our positions, and being able to abandon that is difficult. But even more fundamental than any of these are the desires to be and not be, bhava and vibhava tanha. And for the complete liberation of an arahant, that even the desire or the will to exist must be renounced. Without embracing the will not to exist, that also needs to be renounced. So the liberation of an arahant or a Buddha to not only sense desires, but to the desire to be and desire not to be, and to all kinds of concepts. In the career of Siddhartha Gautama, there is an episode called The Great Renunciation, when he left the palace. In the traditional account of Siddhartha Gautama's life, he was a prince and when he saw the four signs, he saw an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and a samana. Then he decided to renounce the worldly life and go to seek his liberation, his spiritual liberation in the forest. And the thumbnail I put up for this video is from a painting of the Great Renunciation. And this is a very common theme or motif in Asian art. I've seen some really fine examples of this when I was in Thailand. You see the warrior prince Siddhartha cutting off his hair with a sword. He's got his long hair held up above his head and in one bunch, and he's cutting it with his sword. This represents his renunciation of the kshatriya status of the nobleman and the prince. There's this elaboration on the story that gods from the Sudawasa caught his lock of hair as he threw it away, and it's guarded in a stupa up in their heavenly world. Now this renunciation was the last one in a long series in the Jataka stories, which are accounts of the Bodhisattva's previous existences, his previous lifetimes. There are several episodes in which he is a wealthy individual, often a prince or a king, who abandons the worldly life and goes off into the forest. There are many stories of this. Is a common motif in many of the stories in the Jatakas and the Dhammapada commentaries of the wealthy person who abandons everything they have, gives it away, and leaves home. There's one account of a wheel-turning monarch. It was actually a series of them, one after the other, that at that time human lifespan was very, very long, and was 84,000 years. And as soon as they saw the first gray hair, they would leave home and go into the forest. And one after the other followed this course. And this was part of a traditional Indian cultural practice of these are the samanas, those who have left the worldly life, the village life, and seeking spiritual liberation in the forest. So that's one form of renunciation, and this is the way that the bhikkhus they take. When we take ordination, we are making a renunciation, and we're entering into a new phase or style of life that renounces worldly ambition and provides a going forth. Pabajas, the novice ordination, is called going forth. And there is a profoundly liberating aspect to this. It's like burdens have been removed from the mind and from the life. You're no longer caught in that hamster wheel. Related to the concept of Nikkama, renunciation, is the idea of viveka or seclusion. There are 3 degrees of seclusion. There's kaya viveka, chitta viveka, and upadi viveka. Kaya viveka is seclusion of the body. Whenever you remove yourself from your surroundings and go, like when a person goes on retreat, or if you, on a more long-term basis, you leave the city life and go live in a remote place in the country, that's kaya viveka, seclusion of the body. But that's only very superficial. It's quite possible you can go and to some remote cabin in the woods and your mind is still a mess. So chitta viveka is seclusion of the mind. It's when you seclude the mind, meaning you make the mind quiet and you seclude it, abstract it away from chasing after memories and regrets and plans and desires, and become peaceful. That's chitta viveka. And that leads to upadi viveka, which is another name for liberation, for awakening or enlightenment, the realization of nibbana. It means seclusion from the foundations of becoming. Upadi viveka. So there's 3 degrees. So as far as kaya weight goes, separating oneself from physically from um, the busyness of village life, there's a saying uh, that I got from my first teacher that there are three kinds of people that go and live in the forest: the criminal, the insane, and the wise. And I think I would add to that there may be partially overlapping categories, but that's Kaiwi Wake, that's separation. uh, the Tibetan yogi Milarepa said that he who lives in remote places without practicing the Dhamma is just practicing mortification of the body and the mind. So Chitta Vivek needs to follow Kaya Vivek for it to really do any good, but Kaya Vivek is a first step. Then there's a kind of renunciation that is completely internal, that has nothing to do with our physical circumstances. But when we are developing our meditation, we need to learn this internal nekama, the ability to release and let go and abandon the phantasms of the mind. Anyone who's introduced to a meditation, it's a very common experience to find it difficult because the mind is still, even though you're trying to focus on the object of meditation, the mind is going all over the place and won't sit still, even if the body can be kept still, which itself is difficult for many people. But the mind will jump into all sorts of imaginations and memories and fears and desires. And you have to learn to let it go, to practice this internal seclusion, internal renunciation. It can help to remind yourself, this is not me, this is not mine, to not take ownership of anything. When the chitta is very still and quiet and the mind is just being rather than doing, then all these concoctions of the mind can seem very far away, and they will fade of their own if they're not encouraged or fed or energized. For the chitta is not really affected by anything. The chitta is simply pure awareness. And anything that arises in the mind, whether it's very terrible or very wonderful, it's external to that. The chitta cannot be either purified or defiled. It just is as it is. We need to learn that skill of abandonment, just letting it go, letting it be, not taking interest, not taking ownership. And one way of understanding the actual process of enlightenment or awakening, the realization of nibbana, is as the deepest and most profound renunciation. In each moment of our mundane existence, there's a process going on, endlessly repeated, where the mind takes an object and the object fails to satisfy the mind. So the mind is left wanting, and it takes the next object. And this happens at blindingly fast, moment by moment. We're doing this, and we have been doing it for billions of lifetimes, nonstop. That's what we do as conditioned entities. There is mind craving an object, taking the object, being unsatisfied, craving the next object, and taking the next object. And renouncing that process, walking away from that, breaking free of that, saying no to that, that is the realization of Nibbana. Because when we stop doing samsara, we should think of samsara as something we do moment by moment. When we stop doing it, then what else is there? If we're no longer playing the game of the conditioned, then we enter into the unconditioned. And this is the real nikama, the transcendent nikama, the real renunciation, that all the other renunciations are preparations, making it possible, laying the groundwork. But the real nakama is letting go of samsara, releasing the mind from samsara. And we have to let it all go. You know? As long as we're holding on to anything whatsoever, then the mind can't make that final release. There has to be a complete abandonment. We have to give up not only everything related to this existence, but all three realms, the sense, desire, form, and formless. Abandon it all. There's a quite beautiful passage in one of the suttas where a woman who is reborn into one of the heaven worlds, she was a follower of the Dhamma, and she was reborn into one of the heaven worlds, and she still felt that that was not far enough. She hadn't made it yet. And some others who were companions who were also born into the heaven world, they told her, well, you know, you've made it. You were in heaven. And she said, the circle of the world is too narrow, and the kingdom of Brahma is too low. Which is an astonishingly powerful statement when you have some inkling of how wide the circle of the world was considered to be, and how high the kingdom of Brahma was said to be. We're talking at more than cosmic levels, and that's not enough. That's still too much. It's either, you could say, it's either too much, or it's not far enough. All this has to be abandoned. And this is essentially an abandonment of becoming, of coming into existence, of playing the game of conditionality. So another related concept to nekama is samvara, or sense restraint. And this is something that Indriya Samvara is something that's very important for development of meditation. People go on meditation retreats and then they spend a lot of time maybe looking around or going for walks, or they still can't get away from feeding the senses. And one needs to learn to restrain the senses. And this is a kind of practice, Indriya Samvara is something that you can do periodically as an exercise. And it's highly recommended if you do a period of meditation to, if you do like a day long or several days of meditation, to take the 8 precepts, because the 8 precepts confine, if you're following them diligently, they confine you on a physical level, on the level of kaya vivek, from following the usual ways we amuse ourselves or divert ourselves with the senses. You cut them off. So then that is an aid to practicing sense restraint and going within. We need to recognize and understand our psychic position as human beings, that we are embodied entities in the sense desire sphere of existence, which means our ordinary default fallback mode of being is to operate through the 5 physical senses and to find in the senses interest, information, satisfaction, pleasure, and many of our thoughts and feelings and ideas that are operating in the mind outside the senses are still related to the senses. We think about sense objects, we desire them or we fear them, and we're caught in that matrix of the sensuality. And getting beyond that is very difficult. This is one of the benefits of practicing jhana, because it gives you it's not liberation, it's not the end of samsara, but it cuts off a big chunk of samsara. It simplifies matters because you elevate consciousness to a level beyond sensuality, to the level of form, and you experience a mode of consciousness not bound by the senses, which you previously couldn't imagine and think is impossible. So then when you return to your ordinary mode of consciousness, now you understand it better, and you're somewhat less bound to it. So it has this advantage of giving you perspective. So the practice of nikama is actually a liberating and a joyous one, and it's one to be practiced together with the other Pãramīs. And remember that the Pãramīs are like spiritual virtues or powers that persist, and that you can either by how you practice and how you conduct yourself and how you hold your mind, you can either strengthen the Pãramīs, or you can weaken them if you go against them. If you're greedy and obsessive, then you're weakening your Nekama Pãramī. But if you're lightly, if you hold your experiences lightly and are able to move on after a loss easily, then you're strengthening your Nekama Pãramī. So I'll stop there. That's Nakama Parami, and the next week will be Panya Parami, the Wisdom Parami. So let's now see the chat. If there's any questions, I see there's already some stuff on the chat. I'll see if there's any questions. What is the difference between chitta and feeling? Um, a lustful chitta versus lustful feeling, for example. Well, chitta, strictly speaking, is not lustful ever. It's just the experience, the knowing, but it can know lust. Lust is a mental formation that is tied to it's not even in the feeling category, although it's related to that. It's a desire for certain feelings. So it's a sankara, it's a mental formation. And chitta experiences that from the outside, so to speak. Chitta knows the mind with lust and the mind without lust, but it doesn't itself have either lust or revulsion. It just knows. When you become a stream enter or higher states, do you become completely changed instantly, personality wise? Well, there is something that changes, and there's something that stays the same. There is a story in the Dhammapada commentary about Sariputta, who was the uh, one of the two chief disciples of the Buddha, one of the highest after the Buddha. Him and Moggallana were the two most highly evolved spiritual beings. And there's a story that he was out on alms round with the other monks, and they came up to a puddle of water in the path, and all the other monks in the line carefully walked around the puddle, but Sariputta jumped over it with his 2 feet together. And some of the monks thought this was kind of a disreputable behavior, and they told the Buddha about it. And he said, "Oh, let it be, let it be. It's of no consequence. This is part of his inherent personality, because at one time he spent 500 successive lifetimes as a monkey." You know? So the attainment of enlightenment doesn't make a completely new personality, but it does change. There's some fundamental change in the depth that never goes back. Hard to imagine a desire that is not the type that leads to becoming, which is the kind of desire that needed to fuel awakening. No, well, there's a bit of a problem of language, that we use the English word desire to cover a couple of different words, at least in Pali. One of them is tanha, and that's the word that's used in the Four Noble Truths. The root of suffering is desire, is a translation of tanha, which is thirst. And this is the desire that's needy, greedy, wants. You know? But we could also translate the word chanda, which is an impulse to, or an aspiration, or it's a desire in a sense. Yeah? And that can be actually spiritually positive, depending on the object. So there is kama chanda, which is the desire for sense objects, and that's a negative. But there is dhamma chanda, which is the desire for dhamma, the desire for awakening, and that's considered uh, positive and actually necessary. It's the impulse to practice and to realize the truth. Did jhana meditation predate the time of the Buddha? Yes, yeah, it did. The Buddha had, as a bodhisattva, before he became the Buddha, he learned formless jhanas from 2 teachers, so that they were already in existence. Bante, same question as above, please. I don't know what that question was. The timestamp doesn't help. The comments are not timestamped. Ajahn, is there a necessary sequence to the practice of the Pãramīs? No, they're not really a sequence. They're all work together and support one another. Can you please explain how ascetics and monks living in the forest deal with insects and snakes? Yeah, well, I don't have to worry about snakes where I am currently. We just have non-poisonous ones, but I have lived in Thailand for 5 years, and there were plenty of poisonous snakes. There are insects here, lots and lots in the season of biting insects. We try and practice metta. They try to be and ahimsa, harmlessness. I always tell people that not killing the mosquitoes is a very good train you in harmlessness. And the mosquitoes are like our little teachers in that way. But you take whatever precautions you can. When you practicing metta, it doesn't mean you want to associate with these animals. I can have metta for a poisonous snake, but I don't want to pick it up and cuddle it. I just want it to be happy as a snake, but over there, not over here. Would it be correct to say the Pãramīs built on each other in an order, Metta, Sila, Nikama, with the supporting Pãramīs, Aditana, Satya, Virya, Kanti? Yeah, they all support each other. I don't think it's really necessary to put them to develop one before the other. They all should be developed together. Can a stream enter still desire further existence, a wish to be reborn, or is renunciation a desire for birth necessary? Even if further birth happens, there's a lack of development. Well, a stream winner has not completely renounced existence. It's only the Arahant has done that. So a stream winner has had that moment of complete renunciation that allowed him to break free of samsara and realize nibbana, but it's only a moment. He still has a lot of tendencies to desire existence. And it is possible a stream winner can desire something of future rebirth of some fortunate type, but it runs out. The impulse is much weaker than someone who's still a patujana. So it's said that a stream winner can only be reborn 7 times, and that's the weakening of whereas a patujana can be reborn infinity of times. So it's a vast diminution of that impulse. Okay, the world today seems to be arranged in such a way to do the opposite. I.e., the sign, seal, signature of liberation is being able to saturate ourselves, often without much shame or guilt. Why, besides ignorance, do you think society is arranged in such a way, socially engineered to make us reactive beings, running away from displeasure and vice versa? People often the world, people, common run of people in the world think freedom means freedom to fulfill all your desires, whereas that's only a very superficial and trivial level of freedom. The real freedom is freedom from desire, but that's never going to be understood or popular in the vast number of beings. Recall that the Buddha, when he was first enlightened, he was reluctant to teach, and one of the reasons he said was, this generation of beings is much addicted to their sense pleasure. So it's really nothing new. Human beings have always been like that. what's maybe different today is the technological availability of satiating sense pleasures of overload of sense experience. And there is, and you're correct, I think, that to say there is a socially engineered aspect to this because of the simple greed. That there are, if they can, if someone who's got some financial gain to be made by producing some products that titillate the senses, and if they can convince people that they want this or need this, then they've got a good reason to do it. Okay, next question. How do you know if you are a stream mentor already in this life? Um, the the surest way is to examine the mind for the presence or absence of the three fetters. The fetters that are broken at stream entry, that is personality view, right and ritual clinging, Silabata Paramasa, and skeptical doubt, Vichikitcha. So the first thing would be to do some study and make sure you understand what those terms actually mean. The simple English translations are not enough. You need to really look into what those terms mean and then examine the mind not just once or twice, but again and again, and make sure that those are actually eradicated. They do not arise in the mind stream of a stream enterer. Is it that the chitta that is reborn when one dies? No, no, nothing is reborn. The chitta is a process. It's a verb and not a noun. There's nothing to be reborn. Uh, does the sotapanna have an okay, now I understand moment, or is it more like being struck by a lightning epiphany type realization? I think it's different for different people, and the kind of accoutrements is the associated states and can be different. But the actual experience is a realization for momentary realization of nibbana. Do all beings eventually reach nibbana, or do some get stuck in samsara regardless of how many lives they live? In Theravada, there's no guarantee. There's no promise. I think it's different in some other schools of Buddhism, but in Theravada, there's no guarantee that everyone's getting out. Um, in fact, it's more likely that the ordinary course for the majority of beings is just to keep running round and round from higher births to lower births and back again. Can an arahant be reborn if they so choose? No, arahant is finished. This is one of the key differences between Theravada and Mahayana. An arahant has no impulse to be reborn. When you understand the theory of the rebirth process, you can see why an arahant will not be reborn, because without desire there's no impulse, no desire for becoming. There's no impulse in the mind to take another form. Is renunciation considered better kama than dana, or should they both be cultivated in equal measure? um I don't think one is per se better than the other. um it would depend on the degree of each, and a really great dana is itself an act of renunciation. If you give um, only from your surplus that you don't need, then there's no active renunciation involved. But if you actually sacrifice to make a dana, then you're also practicing nekama at the same time. Uh, why does the mind? I have to increase the font size. I can't. I'm having trouble reading these. Uh, Namaste. Why does the mind try to manipulate the length of breaths while practicing anapana? Um, okay, this is something. It's a technical question about meditation. That's actually it's a good question, quite important. I'll give a brief answer to it. One of the important things to learn in doing anapana is to release the mind from controlling the breath. This is a problem for some people. There's a considerable number of people that a sizable minority of people, let's say, that when they try to put the breath, make the breath conscious, they can't help controlling it, and that for those people, it's very important that they learn that. That's an act of renunciation right there, to learn to give up control, let the body breathe, and just observe it. Uh, and that can be a little bit of a learning curve for some people, but it's well worth making the effort to make non-effort. Can you please make a video on kasina meditation? No, I don't think I'll do that, because the reason is that I've never had any success myself with kasina meditation. I can't really do it, so I have to find somebody else. Would stopping smoking be a kind of little renunciation? Yeah, I think it's a pretty big renunciation for many of us. How can rebirth take place if nothing is reborn? Um, the best simple phrase I've heard of this is consciousness arising again to like conditions. There's no, this is the understanding, this is important to gain an understanding of the idea of not self or anatta, that there is nothing that is reborn. There's only a cause and effect. The Melinda Panya has a number of similes for this, and one of them that I find very powerful is an echo. If you shout across the canyon and you hear your voice coming back, is that voice the same or different? You know, that's an answer to the question, is the one who is reborn the same or different? And Nagasena said, neither the same nor different. How can you explain? And he gives a simile of shouting across the canyon. He says, does the voice that comes back, is it the same as your voice or is it different? Okay. So the questions are slowing down. Uh, Here's another one. Can an anagami still crave for pleasant feeling? No. Arhan is beyond sensual pleasure. Anagami can crave for existence, but not for pleasant feeling. Can an anagami still get angry? No. An anagami is also abandoned ill will altogether. Okay, so I think we're coming to a natural winding down, and I thank you all, and the gods of the internet and bandwidth allowing, we'll be here again next week at 6 o'clock. So you can watch for the announcement in your YouTube subscriptions. Bye now. Okay.